I'm Autumn Dryden, and this is my channel. Welcome. So, who's Autumn Dryden? What is this channel? Why are we doing this? I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you. When I was a little girl growing up in rural Montana, among other places, in the 80s and then later the 90s, one of my favorite activities was to watch period movies with beautiful, beautiful costumes. These women looked so gorgeous to me. I was in awe as a child. And I wanted to be like that when I grew up. I didn't want to wear jeans, t-shirts, baseball caps, and the traditional clothing that was current to my time period when there was so many cool things from before that people used to wear. Why wasn't that societally acceptable anymore? I decided when I grew up, I was going to wear corsets. And I didn't care if they were in style, and I didn't care if anybody else wore them. I would just be eccentric and do it because I wanted to. So when I did grow up, to begin with, I did not look like this. I did not wear corsets at first. I also didn't have anything fashion to speak of. I had horrible pregnancies that resulted in years of bed rest and being in and out of the hospital. So my wardrobe was basically sweatpants, nightshirts, a couple of dresses for church on the rare occasions that I made it to church, no corsets at all. And one day, a friend of mine was talking to me and she said, "You know, you're a really creative and interesting person, but you can't tell by looking at you. On the outside, everything you wear is just kind of boring and plain." And I thought about what she said and I realized that she was right. Nothing in my wardrobe made me feel like me, made me feel like celebrating color, made me feel the way that those women in those movies felt. A couple of years after that conversation, I got divorced. And with my divorce, it brought an end to many things in my life. But it was also a beginning. It was a time for me to start over. And since I was starting over, I decided why not really start over and just be who I wanted to be instead of who I was. But how to get from A to B? I actually created a visualization. I sat down one day and I said, okay, current me is ponytails and sweatpants. What do I want to be instead of that? How do I get there? I had no idea how to get there, but the first step was figuring out what I even wanted. So I visualized a woman 10 years in the future, my future me, that had figured it all out. That pretend me knew what she wanted to wear. She had a gorgeous wardrobe. She was confident. She was sexy. She was well put together. She was not frumpy. She was not a sweatpants wearer. She was not insecure. She was not depressed, all of which were adjectives that described me at the time. And I did not want to describe future me. I decided to method act because I had been an actress in high school and I thought, all right, I'm going to say, what would Autumn do? You know the saying, what would Jesus do? I said, what would Autumn do? What would Autumn wear? What would this person, this persona that I had created that was sexy and confident and had a really cool wardrobe and wore corsets, what would she do? Well, she would buy corsets. So I got a couple. And I also discovered that steampunk was a thing and there were other people wearing corsets. Now, they weren't the traditional under the clothing waist training corsets. A lot of them were more bodices. And what I'm wearing today is classed as a bodice and not a corset. But the inspiration came from corsets and stays and traditional clothing that's been worn for many hundreds of years in human history in a variety of cultures. So please allow me to use the umbrella term corset, even if I'm actually referring to a bodice. And forgive me in advance because I'm probably going to continue to use the incorrect terminology because, again, as a kid, I just was like, corsets, corsets, corsets. I want to wear all the corsets. From there, what I did was I went to thrift stores. I was now a young single mom with 3 preschoolers and no money. So I couldn't just go out and buy the custom made beautiful corsets. And you know, the gowns in those movies, those were like thousands of dollars. You can't just have a bustle skirt and a train for $20. That's not how that works. So I knew that getting the level of corsetry and dresses that I had seen in those movies wasn't really in my reach. But how could I make an approximate version? How could I emulate what I had seen without the same amount of cost and the sewing skills that all of that required. Did I mention that I don't sew? I don't sew. I haven't made any of the things that you see around you. I just wear them and I figure out ways to put them together that looks cool, but I don't sew. Technically I could. I know a lot of things, but I hate the sound of sewing machines. I have a lot of sensory issues with sound, and sewing machines are one of those things. And I don't enjoy the process. And also I realize that there's a lot of wasted time, money, and fabric when you're teaching yourself to sew or any other craft. There's a lot of materials that go into it, many hours of research, education, practice to come up with the final product. And I couldn't afford to spend all of the time focusing on that. I was a young mom with kids and I needed to work. So I decided to not spend the 10,000 hours that it would require to become the seamstress at the level that I wanted to be to make the corsets and bustle skirts that I wanted to wear. Instead, I decided that I would try to find them in the world around me and just use things that I found to come up with a style of my own. I also realized that historical accuracy wasn't really on the top of my list. In Victorian times, sure, they wore corsets, but they also had really high necklines that squeeze their necks. And I can't stand stuff around my neck. Like no, that's not okay with me. So I didn't want to be that historically accurate. Also, patriarchy is historically accurate, and one of the things I left behind in my divorce was an adherence to patriarchal culture. I decided that I needed to forge my own path, and back in the old days, corsets were worn under the clothes. They were a utilitarian garb, much like brasiers or bras are today, and they weren't something that you would flaunt and display. But I really liked the idea of wearing it on the outside and showing off the bodice instead of it being an under costume layer. Steampunk was the beginning of my adventure and my search and foray into corsets as a new young single mom, recently divorced. This was 15 years ago, by the way. And I took my sweatpants and my church dresses and my tennis shoes, and I went to thrift stores and I found some skirts that, didn't make me look terrible. And I found some tops that had some styling to them, and I began to build my new wardrobe full of color. I also found a couple of very inexpensive corsets that were mass market by companies like Orchard Corset or Corset Story. I saved up a few $100s to get a few of these cheaper, less well-made, but still somewhat functional corsets and bodices. And I still have a lot of those today. For example, this is a Corset Story waist training corset, and it actually does work as intended, and it is more historically accurate than, say, what I'm wearing right now. So I started with this type of thing. One of my early purchases was this corset over here, this one, that, as you can see, is now an outer layer, but it also still has the boning and the busk and all the other pieces. So I did start out with those type of corsets, and then over time, I discovered Damsel in This Dress. She is a maker based in Utah who has a small factory on a farm where she employs 10 or so. She employs sewists, and they semi-mass produce these bodices. They cut out like a stack of patterns in each size, but they're still, a limited edition with 5 or 6 of each type of corset, maybe in each color. And then once they're gone, they're gone. I discovered her somewhere in the early 20-teens, but her corsets were fairly expensive and I couldn't just go out and buy a whole bunch of them. But over time, I collected 1, 2, 3, and I just kept all the ones that I had instead of recycling them or changing out my wardrobe or retiring things because they weren't in style anymore. The entire wardrobe that I was building wasn't in style, but I didn't care. It looked good on me. It made me feel good. So I decided to keep going with that. Then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden I didn't have anywhere to wear my bodices and corsets besides just around the house and out in the neighboring surroundings. I decided that it was time to stop waiting for society to give me permission to wear corsets to things like birthday parties and costume parties and Renaissance fairs and steampunk gatherings. and instead just wear them anyway because I liked them. I started doing that, and I began to acquire more corsets, more bodices, more skirts. And I live in a small apartment. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I've been there for 8 years, but it's about 900 square feet. So my wardrobe began to literally explode at the seams. Eventually, I took all of the dress up wardrobe or garb type pieces into one room that used to be one of my children's rooms. And I crammed and crammed and crammed all of it into that space. And I decided that I wanted to have a YouTube channel because of the fact that when I had been doing my dress ups, I was going outside and practicing self-photography and taking pictures of myself wearing bodices and corsets and skirts and all of my favorite things that I wanted to wear. And a lot of people were like, do you have social media? Are you online? How do you do that? How do you dress like that? How do I dress like that? Where do you get what you do? Do you sew? Do you not? So I got all of these questions. And one of my friends on YouTube, on Facebook, was a YouTuber. And she was like, Autumn, you should do a YouTube channel. And this was back in 2021. And I just wasn't sure about that. I wasn't sure I wanted to learn the skill set. I wasn't sure I wanted to figure out editing. I was just learning how to use a camera, and videos were like a whole nother step. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to do it. I want to do it because I want to help other people who have not yet journeyed out of their frumpier selves that they don't want to be, but they don't know how to get to become a different version of themselves. And going back to that persona of Autumn that I created, I pretended to be her as I was picking out my clothes. And after a while, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. It just was me. And I never did have to figure out how to get from frumpy to confident because I just did it. And it kind of worked. So this channel is my attempt to show the types of things that I do to increase my self-esteem by wearing clothing that I feel beautiful in. It is an attempt to show that you don't have to be what society wants you to be. And it is an attempt to talk about art, fashion as art. I feel that my body is my canvas and my clothes are my palette. And every day I'm a different work of art. I'll very rarely wear the same thing twice. So I had that room when it was bursting at the seams full of stuff, and I started by trying to film there. And I kept running into roadblocks. I had maybe 6 feet between me and the camera. I had all the clothes crammed very tightly into small spaces, and I was trying to film me doing that and me putting this on, and I just could never get it. I could never figure out a way to get a full body shot, a way to show head to toe stuff. And I really wanted to show the clothes. That was kind of the whole point of doing this. Eventually, this summer, 2024, I decided, with the help of my boyfriend, to rent a space and create 2 channels. I'm doing this channel on my clothes and my fashion and what I wear. And Cody and I are doing a separate gaming channel, but we were able to combine our funds and combine expenses and rent one room that we can use as a studio for both channels. Now I could finally do what I'd been talking about doing for years at this point. And I rented the room, we painted, we built a wall. This is made out of industrial foam with wallpaper on top of it, and there's duct tape holding it together. We brought in all of my clothing racks. I bought more clothing racks to spread the clothes out and make them look more presentable so that I could use them and they were functional and they weren't just crammed in little tiny spaces anymore. So it's here. I've done it. And I want to tell my young self that when I grew up, I did wear corsets. And I'm not the only one. So if you want to wear corsets, or if you don't want to wear corsets and you just want to look at pretty clothes and you just want to watch somebody play dress up, then I hope you will check out my channel, give it a chance. I hope you give me a thumbs up, maybe subscribe, and you will come back to this channel to discover videos on just plain dressing up, where I put together an ensemble and put it on to show people how I combine color, how I combine layers, how I make the silhouettes, what it is that I do when I create the art that is my ensemble clothing. I also want to feature interviews with other people who have fabulous style that doesn't have anything to do with what's in style currently, but has to do with their own sense of self and their own purpose and their own style, because we all have different paths. So I want to show a variety of perspectives besides mine as a white, middle-aged, mother, I want to also show people who are not me and have totally different style choices. But those style choices are just as important to them and make them feel just as good. So I'm going to talk to them about that and show you guys that stuff too. Thank you for coming to my channel. I hope to see you again soon.